Boston Marathon. Is it al-Qaeda or another foreign terrorist group behind the attack that killed 3 and wounded more than 170 others? Investigators said late today that the range of possible suspects remains, quote, wide open. But our next guest says, based on the evidence reported, he believes this could be an act of domestic terrorism. Here now is national security expert Mike Barrett, who has served as director of strategy for the White House Homeland Security Council and a senior analyst for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Heather Higgins is still with him. Mr. Barrett, welcome. Tell me why you think it's a domestic terrorist.
Well, first, let me be clear, Larry, that, this is a horrible tragedy, and we're certainly not trying to take anything away from that. But you have to look at the end of the day at the scale of this. Boston is not Baghdad, and just yesterday in Baghdad, 55 people died in a series of car bombs. When we're talking about the international terrorists, the Al-Qaeda inspired, the truly sort of, the groups that are training in Pakistan, the groups that are going over and getting real paramilitary expertise, we see just, frankly, much higher body counts. And so, the primary reason that you look at this and you say, nobody's claimed responsibility for it. And frankly, while it's a horrible event and it clearly was aimed at killing a few people, you could have done a lot more damage in a few other ways when you have that many sort of innocent civilians standing around.
Is this some kind of crazy Timothy McVeigh thing that you're talking about? Is this a tax day revolt or a Patriot Day revolt? In other words, characterize it some more for us. What does a domestic terrorist mean?
Yeah, if I was gonna put money on it, I would say that it's somebody who would call themselves, a militia, a patriot, a tax day rebellion sort of type of a person. Now, to be clear, it could of course be some, self-radicalized, first or second generation who's upset about foreign events and what's going on internationally. But I think the main point here is that the linkage to an international group and to, again, for example, training overseas in Pakistan or North Africa or Yemen, it seems very unlikely that there's something on that scale that's happened in this particular event.
It seems to me that this is a little bit premature. I mean, we've had this after previous terrorist attacks where there's this rush to blame necessarily, right-wing militia groups, but in fact it doesn't turn out that way. And there have certainly been al-Qaeda sympathizers or radical Islamists who may not be officially attached to them who have little professional expertise in their failed attempts, their thwarted attempts at terrorism. So to conclude simply because it didn't kill enough people, that it wasn't necessarily linked to radical Islam is, I think, a stretch at this point and perhaps a rush to judgment.
Well, I think that's fair. And again, if I were still working for the government, I would not be out talking about this in the sense that they don't want to prejudice anything that's going to be part of the legal case or the investigation. I'm simply, as somebody who studies this stuff, telling you that the hallmarks right now do not indicate anything else. We haven't had the traditional claim of responsibility. In fact, we've had denials of responsibility, which we generally don't get. Normally, somebody is more than happy to take the claim, the claim of victory based on this from their perspective because they want to claim that they killed Americans. They want to be able to say that as a positive thing and sort of the in their view, in their version of the jihad. So again, I don't see this as, I think it's possible that it's an individual, whether their motivation is, disgruntled sort of white American male, sort of fitting the Timothy McVeigh profile, or disgruntled, students, first, second generation that's over here. That's possible. But what I think is the key thing is there's no indication of any kind of a linkage overseas internationally. Generally, we would hear something in terms of intelligence.
Actually, there is a group that has taken responsibility. Whether, in fact, they're just profiting from the opportunity to try and bolster themselves is another question. But that doesn't mean that to assume that an absence of claims of responsibility, which I believe after the first World Trade Center bombing there was no claim of responsibility either, necessarily implies that it is an American doing this as opposed to somebody who is a radical Islamist. One strikes me as neither more likely than the other at this juncture, and it's our responsibility to keep an open mind rather than presuming that it's somebody who's upset domestically.
Well, that's fair enough, ma'am. I mean, if you're going to be a reporter, then the reporting fact is to go ahead and report the news as you know the facts. What I'm telling you is that as an analyst, my analysis is predicated by the fact that as the facts come in and as more information gets gathered, then we can always change our assessment. But the basic assessment here at this point, and I think, frankly, if you talk off camera with most people, what they'll tell you is the same thing that I'm telling you. Nobody wants to come out and say it when they're, speaking on the behalf of the government because nobody wants to have a tape out there saying it and then, and then be proven wrong. What I'm saying is that based based on current evidence, this is the fair assessment of the situation. And as more evidence comes in, if as I provided in the in the notes beforehand, if there's another attack next week in London, if there's another event domestically, if there are some follow-on types of events, then it might look more like something that was orchestrated. But at this point, it looks like a single one-off lone wolf terrorist. Now, whether that lone wolf terrorist, 1, 2, or 3 people, are affiliated or have a motivation that's religious in nature, or a motivation that's sort of anti-government, anarchist in nature, that is still something we don't know about. But we have not seen the linkages that we would normally see if it's somebody who, again, has traveled internationally.
All right, Michael Barrett, we'll leave it there. We appreciate it very much. Thank you for your candid assessment. Now, folks, we're going to